Hello and welcome to 28 Spoilers Later, aka 28 Years Later, Ending Explained, aka, and it's a big spoiler alert, what is Jimmy Savile doing in my zombie movie? My name is James Harvey, contributing editor for Film Stories.
Hello, I'm Ryan Lambie, off of Film Stories.
I am Maria Lattila, also from Film Stories.
We're
Surprise,
all,
surprise.
we're all from Film Stories. What a coincidence. And today we'll be talking all the spoilers about 28 Years Later, the latest zombie epic from Danny Boyle, written by Alex Garland. If you've not seen the film, I'm going to give you a brief synopsis, but also, what the heck are you doing here? Go and watch the film and then come back because we will be spoiling literally everything. Yeah, 28 years later is set, unsurprisingly, 28 years after Danny Boyle's original 2002 zombie masterpiece. And it tells the story of a family who live on the remote Northumberland island of Lindisfarne. Aaron Taylor-Johnson's Jamie takes his 12-year-old son, Spike, played by Alfie Williams, on his first voyage over to the mainland, which is still overrun by very angry zombies. So why don't we first start off by seeing what we thought of the film? Ryan, you wrote our review for filmstories.co.uk, so it is already 1,000 words of what you think on the website, but what are approximately 400 to 600 words of what you think right now in audio form?
I remember coming out of when the credits rolled, not really being sure whether I liked it or not. It was only in the hours afterwards, as I sat thinking about it and picking apart and thinking, well, that bit was really good and that was really good, and then so on and so on, that I realised that actually, on balance, I enjoyed it more than I didn't. I think I was so taken aback by the ending, which of course we'll get to, that I almost struggled in my own head to put together what I thought. The film as a whole is quite different from what I was expecting, and I think a lot of people that have seen the trailer, when they go and see the film, will be surprised at how different it is, from 28 days later and the trailer. It's advertising it.
Perfect. Maria, what did you think?
Unsurprisingly, I loved it. I love horror films, and 28 Days Later, which came out when I was 11, was quite a big film for me and kind of ignited my love for Danny Boyle and his style of filmmaking. And throughout the film, I just kept thinking that I've missed Danny Boyle, I doubt I'm the only one thinking, Yesterday wasn't his best film. I didn't really care for Trainspotting 2 either. I don't think it was quite lived up to its potential. Liked Steve Jobs, but it feels like Danny Boyle's been playing it kind of safe, whereas this felt like he's just throwing everything there, and I loved it. Just completely loved it.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting that we're saying that it feels like this isn't... I mean, I don't think anyone could accuse... having watched 28 Years Later, I don't think anyone could accuse either Danny Boyle or Alex Garland, who wrote it, of playing anything safe at all. But a sequel to sort of, one of the most popular and zombie movies of all time, really, in sort of an era where we're getting so many sequels and remakes, and also it's so strange that we're having this conversation thinking that, like, oh, after original films, Steve Jobs and Yesterday, which I also agree are maybe not Danny Boyle's best work, we're getting something that feels like him firing on all cylinders again, which feels really good. But yeah, I for my 2 cents, I absolutely loved it. I think I was sort of pleasantly surprised, I think, how much I enjoyed it. I think when I heard that they were filming, I think the first thing that I noticed really about it is it looked beautiful, in a sort of weird and scrappy way. Because when I heard they shot huge chunks of it on iPhones, which I'm sure we'll get to. I mean, iPhones strapped to the front of, multi-million pound Hollywood camera equipment, but still, the actual camera bit was in iPhones. And when I first heard they were doing that, I was worried that was going to be a gimmick and they were just trying to recreate the sort of gritty handheld camcorder feel of the first film. But I thought it worked so well. It felt so. It was the editing was so tight, and it felt so tense and gory, and just really and really smart as well. Like, it felt like it was saying a lot of stuff. It had a lot of thoughts in its head, which you don't always get with films about zombies pulling people's spines out of their bodies. But yeah, I absolutely loved it. And so I think it makes sense to start this chat sort of way back in the beginning with 28 Days Later. So I suppose we've already mentioned a little bit. What were your sort of relationships with 28 Days Later? Maria, you've touched on yours. Ryan, how did you feel about the original film back in 2002?
I'm so old, I saw it in the cinema. I think it's hard to... I remember seeing it with a fairly full theatre, and it was really scary, really intense. I don't think anyone was prepared for how aggressive that film is. I think the way was paved for the sort of digital style of it with Blair Witch Project. People were kind of primed to sort of see something that looked, rough around the edges in a cinema. But the kind of intensity of the opening, and then the eeriness of, the bits that people talk about now, the empty London streets, which, in retrospect look quite prescient. It was such a, captivating horror film. I mean, it doesn't all work. I think there are parts in it where it does sort of lull, but I think the bits that are good are so good that it is deservedly, a cult classic. I mean, because it did well, but it wasn't like some sort of huge. It wasn't like the biggest movie of the year or anything. It wasn't some massive blockbuster. But when you saw what it did to horror, it was immediate. I mean, the Dawn of the Dead remake wouldn't have happened without this. Not in the same way, I'm sure. And interestingly, Alex Garland has said that he got the idea for these sort of rage infected. They're not technically zombies. Some horror nerds will say, don't call them zombies. They're bloody zombies. Just get over yourselves. But he got the idea from playing Resident Evil, the original PlayStation and Saturn game, and that he was scared by the game, but the bit that really freaked him out was the famous bit where the dogs come smashing through the glass into a hallway, and he plays suddenly running away from these rabid dogs. And he kind of put the two things together. So I was like, well, what if the zombies were fast? And then, interestingly, Resident Evil 4 came out not that long after 28 Days Later, and that had the Gallardos, these sort of fast, aggressive, angry villager type zombies. So there's those really interesting kind of feedback loop in terms of like how this film has been inspired by pop culture, because it owes a debt to Night of the Living Dead and all these zombie films that came before it, but then it affected zombie films afterwards.
Yeah.
So yeah, a very important film.
Have we had a slow zombie film since 28 Days Later? Because none immediately spring. I mean, to be honest, there's not been many zombie films, I think.
I think George Romero, like his Land of the Dead and Diary of the Dead, might have been still been the more traditional zombies. I can't remember those. I don't really much care for George Romero's later zombie films. I mean, Alex Garland is a bit sort of reluctant to sort of claim ownership over fast zombies. He was saying when I spoke to him the other day about how he thinks there might have been a sort of B movie from the 1980s that might have had fast zombies, like I think Return of the Living Dead, directed by Dan O'Bannon. I think he seems to think that there might have been some fast zombies in that, but I've seen it, but I'm not since I was a teenager, so I don't remember it very well. But then there's always been kind of like George Romero himself kind of played fast and loose with kind of zombie lore, like if you look at the original, his 1968 one, you've got a kid attacking a mother with a trowel, so it's like, so they can use tools. There was one called Nights of Terror, it's an Italian one. Michel Bianchi directed that one, and that one has like zombies with poles and, using weapons and moving quite quickly.
Yeah.
the zombie genre is always kind of like shifted.
Yeah. Well, that's I think what we quite often forget. I think I'm right in saying that Night of the Living Dead was almost the start of the what we think of as just a zombie, like a
Yeah,
shambling,
the modern zombie film. That's the one.
like because I think zombie before that was I think isn't it something in African folklore, sort of
Yeah,
mysticism,
yeah,
something like that?
Haitian sort of
Yeah,
voodoo, that kind of thing. That yeah, because it's like I walked with a zombie and White Zombie. Though these sort of earlier zombie movies, but they're not. They're not what modern horror fans would associate with zombie films now. You know, the whole idea of the sort of yeah, zombies just spontaneously rising en masse from the grave, and I mean that was kind of inspired. George Romero was inspired by a book by an author called Richard Matheson, I'm Legend, which has been it's been adapted itself a few times since. There's a great one Vincent Price did, made for about 50p, but it's great. And but in that it was vampires, but the whole idea was that it was sort of a very modern, almost scientific look at vampirism, like vampirism as a disease, as an infection. So in a weird sort of way, there's elements of that threaded both through Night of the Living Dead and into 28 Days Later, because obviously that's an infection that gets out of a lab. Yeah, sorry, what was the question?
Oh, just talking about 28 Days Later. I suppose we should talk about 28 Weeks as well, which is almost the is it the elephant in the room? I don't know. When we look talking about 20 years, because that one wasn't made involving the original creative team. That was in 2007.
Carlos Fresnadillo.
Yeah, in 2007. And I rewatched it over the weekend, and it feels very of its time. There's a lot of guns, a lot of explosions.
Jeremy Renner.
Yeah, Jeremy Renner's in it, shooting everybody. Yeah, what do you like 28 Weeks Later, Maria?
I do.
Can you remember it?
Just about. I have the DVD somewhere, potentially in another country, but I do have it. I always thought that, yeah, it was really interesting and really good. It's very different to 28 Days Later, but I don't think it's bad. I think that whole beginning is insanely good, with Robert Carlyle, and then how that whole storyline kind of feeds into it. But no, I think it does expand on it really successfully. I know that 28 Years Later then kind of really rejects where the ending went, because obviously in the end, the infection, and spoiler alert, spread to Europe, and you see, it's Eiffel Tower, isn't it, where you see the infected running rampant. And yeah, I thought that was interesting and kind of expanded the scope of things. And I wonder why they wanted to then go back to just UK. I mean, I can imagine that Brexit was maybe a bit of a reason why 28 Years Later isn't quite following on from 28 Weeks Later.
Yeah.
There were a couple of things in it, wasn't there? Because there was, apart from the European thing, there was obviously there was the whole plot point in 28 Weeks Later. It is 28 Weeks later. 28 Weeks Later, isn't it? Sorry, it's something so similar to such similar titles. But there was the whole thing about it was basically an American occupying force that taken over, and there were sort of zones where protected zones, weren't there, that were sort of militarized, and also the idea that the rage virus, you could carry it without showing symptoms. That doesn't feature in this movie, although we can get to it later, but it could play into the sequel potentially, that idea maybe. Yeah, but I don't know. Yeah, 28 years later, 28 weeks later, sorry, it's a really nihilistic, grim film. The interesting thing about Danny Boyle is that as aggressive and grim as 28 Days Later is, it is not without hope or without glimmers of humanity. I mean, it's got Alex Garland's thing of, a critique of the sort of dark side of masculinity in it. With the military lot, Christopher Eccleston and that sort of stuff. But 28 years later is just such unrelentingly grim. The funny thing was, I spoke to the director once about it, and he said that even he found it a bit much, that his sensibility is not that really. So somehow, I don't know, through the screenwriting and the collective action of everybody involved in it, they just made this really grim, depressing, nasty sequel. It does look good though.
Didn't 28 Days Later have multiple endings? And the one that they chose is that kind of like hopeful one, but wasn't everything else just grim?
There is the scene there is that really nice scene where they go on a shopping spree in a supermarket, and they have a lovely time, and you can tell that's a bit of wish fulfillment. And
there's a brilliant line as well in there. I really like the line in the script where she's Naomi Harris sort of says about that all the books that have been written that are going to be there'll be no more books, there'll be no more like civilization has essentially ended. I can't quote it verbatim, but it's a great line.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting comparing it to 20 years because it's kind of, there's such a, like, in the immediate aftermath of the apocalypse, there's kind of so much that there's almost this attitude of like live fast, die young, etc. Like they're just trying to live moment to moment, and then they find those moments of trying to get of fun and levity, and I'm just going to buy loads of Wotsits and eat them in the car on a road trip, or the bit where they for some reason decide to do a jump over that they're in the car and they decide to use like the other cars as a ramp and just do like a little jump into the tunnel, sort of basically unnecessarily, and they nearly die, but they have a really fun time doing it.
Well, exactly. Wouldn't you do that if it was the apocalypse? Like, come on. Life is already bad.
Well,
at least jump over some cars.
I think we all know that if the apocalypse did come, I'd just drown myself in the Thames or something. I'm not built to cope with anything from these films, really. But yeah, anyway, so we should probably start talking about 28 Years Later again. I reckon. So at the start of the film, we actually should talk about right at the opening, because I really loved when it does flash back to the same time period as 28 days later. This is going to get very confusing very quickly. And the kids are watching Teletubbies, as we saw in the trailer, I think, that it's a very good trailer. And then a young boy called Jimmy, that'll be relevant later, goes and finds his dad, who turns out is a priest in a strange... I can't remember what the term is for that kind of Christian that thinks Judgment Day is here and wants the apocalypse to turn up. But he ends up crowd surfing on a load of zombies, which I really enjoyed. What did we think of the intro?
Yeah, I mean, it did what it needed to do, and it kind of hinted at some of the kind of goofiness that we'd get later. At the sly. Is it sly? Because it's not very subtle, is it? But blood splattering all over a CRT television with Teletubbies playing on it, and the religious imagery, which I'm guessing is really going to feed into the next film, judging by the next film's title, and the upside down crucifix. Again, we'll get to. But yeah, I mean, it's good because not everyone will have seen the original. And I think all you really need to get up to speed on the film and what's happened to the UK and what it's been infected by, you can get it all from that sort of opening couple of minutes, can't you?
Yeah.
It reminded me of another Danny Boyle film, which I absolutely love, which is Sunshine. And Mark Strong's character, is it Pinbacker, I think, a very similar kind of character to Jimmy's father, the vicar. And it just made me, because there was recently, Danny Boyle said that Sunshine was imagined as, first of a trilogy. And I'm still a bit salty about that, because I would have loved a trilogy of those films. So yeah, I thought, is that another thing that Danny Boyle is potentially quite interested in as a director?
It's probably more an Alex Garland thing, isn't it? Because Alex Garland writes Sunshine. So I think he's got certain things that he likes to pick apart or parody in his films, in his writing, and yeah, I think religion is probably one of them.
Definitely, and I think, and straight after that, we fast forward to 28 days. Incidentally, I am quite cross that they didn't wait another 5 years, and make 28. Wait, would it be 5 years? Yeah, it would be 5 years. It would be 2030, wouldn't it? To make 28 years later come out 28 years after 28 days later. I think that would have been great. But I can see why they didn't do it, because it feels very of the moment. Anyway, we fast forward to 28 years after the outbreak. And as I said in the introduction, we've got the introduction of this family played by Aaron Taylor-Johnson, Jodie Comer, and Alfie Williams, who's a newcomer, who plays sort of the lead of the film, really, Spike. And they're living on Lindisfarne, am I right in saying? This island in Northumberland, I believe, that you can only access at certain times of day because the tide comes in and blocks off the walkway, which is such a interesting. It's such a great setting for an outpost in the apocalypse, and I think that's a really good idea. But I loved how they, as we find out quite soon in the film, they've regressed completely back to some sort of weird 1950s fetishized view of Britishness. There's a picture of a young Queen Elizabeth on the wall, and they've got like posters of these are all the jobs in our community, and all of them are like a boat fixer and fisherman and seam master or something. And I think I'm right in saying that they specifically say that all the jobs belong to men, which is quite interesting in the context of sort of a lot of what the film's talking about. What do you think of the intro on the Holy Island?
I liked it. Like you say, they've regressed. They've inevitably regressed technologically because they don't have any smartphones or TVs and all this sort of thing. So they're necessarily having to sort of take on this sort of pre-industrial society just to survive. But they didn't necessarily need. It was not necessarily a given that they had to regress in terms of gender roles or in terms of, like you say, looking back to some earlier time. I guess maybe like in World War II, we sort of collectively as a country told stories about our sort of noble past in order to, you're sort of creating a narrative around fighting a war. So you could say that was as part of an effort to survive in this kind of infected hellscape. They'd insulated themselves with these kind of cozy stories about Britain's past and everyone's place in it. But the film very clearly shows the downside and the dark side of that. I think if anybody who, as a kid growing up, had to go to a working men's club and everyone's drunk apart from you and everyone's singing and screaming and on tables, would probably recognise a certain scene in this, and how in some ways that is more scary than being stuck on the mainland, being chased by infected people. I very much appreciated those sequences.
Yeah. I mean, Maria, what did you think? Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to see more of it. Like Ryan said, sort of like they've regressed, not just technologically, but like the gender roles have come back. And there's another scene in the film that I found not necessarily problematic, but just frustrating. And we'll probably talk about it later when we talk about the Swedish guy. But yeah, I thought that was really interesting. And obviously, like, you've got the bit where someone's taking a shower and it says, don't take too long, and, everything's kind of running low. I thought that was really interesting. And as much as I loved this film, it did feel like a bit too much was crammed in. And everything that was crammed in was really interesting. And I wanted more of that. And yeah, I'm hoping that maybe, even though this sets up the sequel as potentially taking mostly place in the mainland, I am hoping that there is a little bit of room to return to the island, especially if they do get the third film made, which is what they want to make. that hasn't been financed yet. But I believe the opening weekend for 28 Years Later was pretty strong and made a buttload of money. So I'm hoping that we will get to return to the island and see how that really works there, sort of day-to-day life.
Yeah, I mean, I personally, I'd be surprised if they got if they didn't bring Aaron Taylor Johnson back for the maybe even if not the next film, the one after, which, like you say, I think touch wood, unless it completely collapses at the box office, is looking pretty likely that would get greenlit. But yeah, I think it's also so interesting that they kind of, as well. I think you mentioned this because we should say as well. Brian's got an interview with Alex Garland, who wrote the film, that's available on filmstories.co.uk and also on the Film Stories podcast, available wherever you get your podcast. And you were talking to him about anti-intellectualism, and I think it's so interesting that in the island there's a case of they almost don't seem to be making no effort to try and get back to any kind of technologically advanced state. I mean, they're using bows and arrows, and everything's running low. They just send like the odd person onto the mainland to. I don't think we ever actually establish exactly what they're going for. You'd assume they're going to hunt, like deer or something to bring back. But then,
yeah, he's described as a scavenger, isn't he? I've seen in synopses and things.
yeah,
He being Aaron Taylor Johnson's character, but he doesn't really scavenge much. I think that they go to an old house, don't they? They find one or two little bits and pieces, but they don't really come back with much. I think it's
they
almost
come
like
back with a frisbee.
yeah, that's right, yeah.
I'll be honest. If I sent some people to go and get some vital resources from the mainland, and they came back with a frisbee, I think I'd be a bit miffed, personally.
But no, because this is like a coming of age. They go out to kill people, basically, isn't it? Just so that Spike can
It's
kill.
a rite of passage, yeah.
Yeah, to become a man, because that's what men do. They kill these zombies or the infected.
Yeah,
And if you don't, you're not a man.
But it's so because I mean I think there's a moment where like a herd of deer go past, I think, isn't there? And they just ignore them. Like they don't try and kill one and bring it back to get meat for the people on the island. And instead they're just going into houses that they know have already been ransacked a million times before and looking for frisbees and spoons. But yeah, I mean, I think Aaron Taylor Johnson's got a line at some point where Spike asks about other villages, and he just says, "Oh, they don't have anything that we don't have," and just like this complete lack of curiosity that feels so sort of contemporary, and like it feels very. I think in general the film does a really good job of justifying itself as a film that exists in 2025, rather than at any other point. But yeah, I thought that was really
it's a film about isolationism, isn't it? And about almost a kind of populism, I suppose. That kind of populist idea of what a man should be like, or a community should be like. And the reason I asked Garland about that was because it felt like there's a clear distinction made between Aaron Taylor Johnson's character. What is his name? I completely forgotten.
Jamie.
Jamie. There's so many J's. Anyway, about between his character and Ray Fiennes, Dr. Kelson. You know, that you've got two different types of male figure, if you like. One is unthinking and is about physicality and being the macho alpha male, and the other is sort of intellectual, might be an eccentric and twisted by the landscape, as everyone is, but he's smart, he uses his brain, and he's an artist as well, in a funny sort of way.
Yeah, he's done a really good job. He builds all these. This is Ray Fiennes' character, Dr. Kelson, and he builds these really elaborate bone sculptures, which do look a little sinister, but they're quite impressive for one man covered in iodine, living on his own in the woods.
It's art.
Yeah, I wonder how many attempts he made. Like, I wonder if there's like for the first 5 years that he was trying to do it, there's just a big pile of fallen apart bone structures, and he gets really cross. But I suppose we should talk about Jodie Comer's character. I think is it? I can't remember if it's Isla or Isla.
Yeah, it's Isla.
Is Isla? Yeah, I felt for whatever reason I felt like they pronounced it different ways in the film, but that could just be me and my terrible memory. Speaking of memory, it's a theme. As particularly with her character, she's suffering from a mysterious illness that nobody knows what it is because, as they sort of point out, oh, we've not got a doctor. And in the 28 years, nobody on the island has thought, maybe on one of these scavenger trips, we should actually try and look for like some kind of medical
professional.
textbook. Yeah,
They don't need experts. Who needs experts? We've had enough of experts.
that's true. They're absolutely
That's the point
fine
of the film.
with the bows and arrows. I mean, that's made in the film, all the bows and arrows. Yeah. But yeah, I thought she was really sort of interesting as a character in swapping over that kind of child, mother and child. Like, then the child has to look after the mother, and they end up on the mainland. What did we think of her character?
Again, I thought there was an interesting contrast between her and the father, because he's all about making a show of being tough and literally making a show out of being tough, and his tall stories in front of everyone. And then there's a sequence with her, and she protects her son, but doesn't let him know that she actually killed the zombie while he was asleep, and essentially saved him from being eaten. He'll never know what she did for him, and I thought that was quite moving, really, as a like a little illustration of a mother's protectiveness over a child.
Yeah, and she's one of those actors, kind of like Ray Fiennes is. When she shows up, you're kind of like, oh yeah, like this is about to get really good. She is just that charismatic, and you really believe who she's playing. You kind of get lost into it. You don't think, oh, that's Jodie Comer. You just completely believe Isla as a character. And funny enough, we watched The Rise of Skywalker last night, and she has a very tiny part as we've been watching Star Wars films.
Why?
Okay, we had to.
Why would you do that to yourself, Maria?
Well, eventually, we didn't really want to, but we were both kind of like, we're going to have to, aren't we? Because we're now like committed. We've watched all the other ones.
That's not
to.
true. You could just pretend pretend it ends with The Last Jedi. Pretend.
We weren't impressed. But yeah, she obviously has a very tiny part as Rey's mother. And even in that little part where she's seen in tiny little flashbacks, she's just so committed and so intense that you really believe her. And I think this is also really what aids the character in 28 years later, especially when you do get to Dr. Kelson and he begins diagnosing her, and you're kind of going like, oh. Yeah. And then, I mean, I was very moved, and I may have had a tear or two in my eyes.
Was anybody a little bit confused about her, why, as a plot point, she was the way she was? Because, she'd be sometimes confused. She sometimes thought the son was a father, and she didn't seem to know where she was at certain points, and sort of like the symptoms kind of phased in and out. And I sort of, eventually you find out, okay, she's got brain cancer, and that's why it's affected her cognition and things like that. But I was thinking why it took me a while to kind of realise that it ties into the theme, I suppose, of people forgetting and misremembering the past, and because she sort of thought that she was essentially living in the past because of this problem with a brain cancer, but it didn't immediately come across to me why they'd done it in the film, and it's almost felt like some of the symptoms almost felt like a bit like in a gothic novel, like in Jane Eyre, what's his name, Rochester's wife in the attic is sort of, that kind of slightly Victorian. I don't know where I'm going with this.
I thought that was really interesting though, because I think it's like in that sort of scenario, because they don't know, I mean, their understanding of medicine has kind of gone back pre-Victorian almost. It's like back in those in terms of like mental illness and whatever, where they just say, oh, she's got hysteria, or she's got melancholy, or and not really understanding what's going on. They also have like no real idea of what could be going wrong over it all. They just know that something is obviously very wrong. And I think it is, like you say, it is kind of a thematic thing where, because she's forgetting, it's almost like she's forgetting the more recent past and going back to the sort of the halcyon days of before everyone turned into a zombie. But then she's almost that link back to the world that there was before, where she's sort of she feels more empathetic and more relatable and more human in a lot of ways, in the way that she's interacting with Spike. And it's almost like this is what we've forgotten, which itself is quite interesting, considering the whole film is sort of about people almost forgetting what we've forgotten.
It's like nostalgia is a sickness, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like the old definition of nostalgia as being almost like a disease, or like yeah. Rather than, isn't Star Wars nice? Or like whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, but also I think this is something that I can't think of another film about the apocalypse, basically, or something like zombies done is, all the injuries and everything's always about, getting beaten up, or you break your leg or something, or, in this case, you get the rage virus. But there is still going to be cancer, and it is going to have a huge, in this case, I think Dr. Kelson says, you have advanced breast cancer, and then obviously it's spread and it's probably in her brain and so on. But that is still going to happen, and there is no chemo, there is no radiation. So you are going to get people like this. You are going to get patients who are going to be taken by cancer far, quicker than what we would get now when you've got treatments and everything. And I don't remember seeing that in any other film, and I thought that was really interesting as well.
Yeah. And well done to Ray Fiennes' character as well, for remembering all his medical mumbo jumbo for 28 years after he last met a person and had to use it. I think that speaks wonders to medical training in this country.
We don't know what he was doing with all those corpses. He might have been doing some kind of autopsies.
Doing his revision, keeping on track of his studies. But yeah, that was also a very fun. That I don't know about your screenings. It did get it, because this ties into something about. I'm so interested to see how it gets received in America, in particular. That's sort of around the world, really. But the American box office is sort of that's the one that, for whatever reason, we tend to focus on. But it felt like such a British film. Like, it was so, there were so many, in my screening, when Spike first asks about Dr. Kelson, the character says, "Oh, he used to be my GP back in the day." And it's such like a tonal whiplash of oh, we're talking about sort of NHS terminology now, compared to after we've just been seeing people vomiting blood and getting splattered in the head. But yeah, there's so many uniquely British little quirks. As we've already mentioned the Teletubbies. There's those little nods. Even the frisbee sort of stuff feels so British, and we keep getting. I think the editing is done so well, where it keeps cutting back to. I think is it Laurence Olivier's Henry V, the Technicolor film with the bow and arrows. This sort of imagery, but what did you guys think of? Because in terms of the box office, I think we talk quite a lot about how we don't really have big British films anymore, and this felt like a massive film that felt very uniquely British in a really interesting way. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, it feels British, not just in terms of that what you said, but also Danny Boyle's filmmaking and everyone with him makes it feel almost like a social realist drama from the 60s and 70s, or at times it sort of reminded me of these old sort of public information videos you used to get when I was a kid. I think they showed them well into the 90s, where you'd have kids telling kids not to do certain things, don't swim in estuaries, don't climb
telegraph
power
poles.
lines,
I
all that
kind
of thing. don't turn a light on if there's and you smell gas. But like the style of it is like those, or like Threads, or like, I think somebody mentioned Kess. It's got an element of, because like if you stripped out the sort of infected zombie type stuff, it could easily, the first chunk of it could easily just be the story of a boy living in the shadow of his aggressively macho dad who loves shooting and fishing and all these very masculine pursuits, and not really knowing how to fit be the version of the boy that his dad wants him to be. That's a very British thing, dramatic story, you know. And yeah, so it is very British, and it's British in the same way that 28 Days Later was British, because that was very influenced by John Wyndham. And Dave the Triffids opens with almost a very, very similar scene of a man waking up in hospital and finding that basically the world has ended and he's virtually the only untouched person left. He comes out of the hospital, and you know, in that it's killer plants, but it's brilliant. It's a brilliant novel. So yeah, so it's British in that regard as well. It feeds into a British, what's the word, canon lineage of horror and science fiction. Yeah,
it's that interesting kind of meeting point of very universal themes, like masculinity and what it means to kind of be a man in this kind of society. But it's a very British take on it. Like, you know, you could imagine a lot of this as an American production. The themes would probably be largely the same, but it would be a completely different kind of way of telling the story. As someone who's not British, I thought, yeah, it felt very much, you know, from Queen Elizabeth on the wall to, you know, Jamie in the makeshift pub telling their story of going to the mainland with a pint in his hand and just exaggerating everything. It did very much feel like what my experience with British men has been, largely.
It's so interesting. I'd not considered that they've, out of everything else they've lost, they've still found a way to make beer. I mean, I suppose they've got.
It's not
I don't know.
complicated, is it?
Is it not?
Hops, sugar.
Where are they getting? Where are they getting sugar
thousands
from?
of years. It's sugar beet.
This is my thing. And this is a really, maybe a stupid question, and I'm fully ready for the internet to make fun of me, but because we're so reliant on technology, what happens when you run out of like basic things like paper? Like, we can make paper. Obviously, paper has been made for centuries, probably. But does anyone know how to make it without a machine? And everything, like basic stuff like that. What do you do?
It's really annoying saying, yes, I do know how to make paper, but it's not not very good paper.
I'm camping with you in an apocalypse. I'm hanging out with you.
In a way, this film does actually answer that, because there is not a book in sight. Nobody, I don't think you ever really, there's pictures on the walls and things, but you don't really know when they were made. They were probably made years earlier by somebody and just hung there ever since. Nobody ever, I don't recall seeing anybody writing anything. It is almost a post-informational, pretty much, society. I think that's why it's so interesting when, that's something probably need to touch on as well, is when Eric the Viking shows up. He's got his phone with him, although it's convenient, only got 1% of battery left. Just long enough to get in a little jab about
lip fillers, yeah.
Yeah, which also feeds into its thing about, gender roles. But that's quite startling, actually, because there's a title card at the beginning that says, the world is basically carried on outside the UK as normal. But it's so easy to forget that, because you become immersed in what's shown to you, what you're presented with. And then this guy shows up and they've got guns and he's got a mobile phone. It's like, oh God, yeah. Like the whole of Europe is like a paradise compared to the UK.
Yeah. He's also sort of the meanest Swede, I think, in English language cinema that I can remember. Normally, this is pure national stereotypes, but then the Swedish people, I think it's like, is it the second Tom Holland Spider-Man where he goes to Sweden and then he's going, oh, I need to find a phone, I need someone to help me, and everyone's just like, oh yeah, sure, like we'll help you immediately, and everyone's absolutely lovely. And I think that's very much the national stereotype of Sweden in particular, and then in this he's just a really mean, clearly a horrible, nasty man.
Did you think so? I didn't take that. I didn't take him as he's a horrible character. I thought he was quite annoying.
Yeah.
I,
he was like, he kept saying, "Oh, why did I save you then? Like, what happens now?" He's just being very angry and rude all the time.
I took it that he was a young recruit, and was stressed and had lost all his buddies quite violently, and was just kind of, I mean, he wanted to kill the baby.
Yeah, that's a red flag.
But you could say that was, playing devil's advocate. He didn't know. I mean, they still don't know actually whether that baby. This is what I was talking about earlier. 28 weeks later, is that baby could be asymptomatic. It could be. It could be. You could take it as read that the baby's not infected, and therefore, yeah, I don't know what, but he's not infected. Or it could be that it's asymptomatic and that it's going to end up spreading the disease through Lindisfarne in the sequel. I don't know.
It's a bit The Last of Us, isn't it, with Ellie? A similar kind of thing of Ellie being born. So, yeah, maybe this is a prequel to The Last of Us, and we just didn't know it.
Yeah, like it's that whole one miracle child trope. I mean, something like Children of Men as well. Like it's a staple of apocalypse fiction like that. But I think it's probably worth talking about the because that was, I think, the first moment that I found really shocking and surprising, was seeing, oh, there's a pregnant infected person, and you kind of go, oh, that's something. I'll be honest, it didn't really occur to me at the time that it could have been a non-infected person who is pregnant and then becomes infected. I almost just took it as read, like, oh, this means that the infected are still having sex. Which
I think there's hints of that throughout the film, because when they first go to the mainland and they hunt the lowdowns, whatever they're called, down lows. I don't know. There's that particular breed of infected that are eating the worms and stuff. But it's sort of heavily implied there that that's basically a family, because there's like a male, female, and then there's like seems to be two children.
Yeah.
And then if you've got groups of them in packs and you've got an alpha, it sort of implies to me that they're kind of forming like their own kind of little society. I mean, if they're still humans and they can subsist on different things, so obviously they've been hunting deer as well and eating those, but they're going to arrange themselves into some sort of semblance of a society, and so they must be perpetuating themselves somehow, mustn't they? Because there's younger ones and older ones, and
that's really violent sex, I must say.
I mean, it wouldn't even be the most outlandish thing in this series now if you did have infected zombies having sex. Interestingly, there's a zombie baby in the Dawn of the Dead remake, isn't there?
Yeah.
That James Gunn wrote. So yeah, nothing new under the sun.
Nothing new. Exactly. And I think, speaking of outrageous, surprising moments, I think we're quickly getting to the end, so we should really touch on the elephant in the room. So at the end of this film, by the time you get to the last 5 minutes, you might be wondering, oh, I heard Jack O'Connell was in this. Where's Jack O'Connell going to come in? And then he has sort of one of the most bizarre entrances of any character in recent cinema history, I think. He's wearing a tracksuit with what I imagine is in reality a wig. It looks quite wiggy.
No. They look really wiggy. Come on.
Yeah.
All of them look terrible. They look like and I love Hong Kong cinema, but it looked like a 70s martial arts film.
No, but I'm wondering whether in universe it's a wig.
Maybe.
I'm wondering if, because it seems unlikely that they'd get that many people to form a cult all with long, luscious blonde locks.
I've read one theory is that like the kids, they're all gathered around watching Teletubbies, and they're all blonde. So whether they're all his siblings, and they somehow, some of them survive.
That's what I thought. That's the group from the beginning.
I just assumed.
Yeah, but
But
Yeah,
then
wouldn't they
I don't
have
know how they'd all
died?
get out. Yeah, I assume they all
Yeah.
got.
I assume they all died, and also I feel like there's too many of them like fighting, and
Yeah, it,
so
it
I'm not
it's a
sure I entirely buy that. But yeah,
yeah.
I think it's
Look.
more likely they're kind of like like a Manson family type cult.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, yeah, I didn't. I did not particularly care for that ending, and it kind of some of Danny Boyle. Talked about Danny Boyle being a good director. He is a good director, but there are times where I felt like his style got a little bit too insistent, a bit too like it just pulled me out of the film. Like the use of boots in the poem was fantastic in the trailer, but I didn't think it. I don't think we needed it in the film. And the quick cuts of the classic the Henry V film pulled me out of the film. And this is just me, I can 100% see an argument for them, but it almost feels like it needed to pull back a bit. And then this last sort of however many minutes it was just went. It was a full gonzo. It leaves me concerned for the sequel as much as I am looking forward to the sequel.
Interesting. I think we might be at completely opposing ends with all of that. First of all, I loved at the bits where it cuts back to Henry V, etc. I think it was just so.
What did
I
it
don't know.
add?
Maybe I was just sort of.
What does it do?
I think I don't know. I just think it was quite. I liked the rhythm of the edits that they're doing, and I love that sort of like it's taking it back to. It's just visually taking it back to that time, and then combined with the Boots poem as well. Maybe I do think it worked a lot better in the trailer than it does in the film, but I think in terms of you got that legacy of people going to war and almost describing like. I mean, Alex Garland is obviously in his sort of war era. His last two films were Warfare and Civil War, and now he's got 28 wars later. Is that anything? Is that? But yeah, it's clearly a topic that is interesting him at the moment, and I thought it's like tying back to that legacy, and also I think I just found it refreshing to have a big mainstream release willing to be a bit more experimental in a way, just in terms of its filmmaking. I mean, just showing all of these like in the same way that 28 Days Later originally the editing style, you just get these flashes of the way that the zombie attacks were filmed. It's kind of it's not always completely linear. It's a lot of like.
Sorry, yeah, that's the other thing as well. That I some people seem to like it, but the kind of sort of bullet time thing they did every time a zombie got hit in the head with an arrow. I think once I'd have been fine with, but when it happened like 2-3 times, I was kind of okay. Yeah, you've done that trick now.
Yeah,
Just little things like that are just kind of like you don't need to do that. It's kind of frustrating.
Yeah, I see that. But then in terms of the ending as well, I don't think I've ever got out of a film more excited for the sequel. Like I really want to see just because I have no idea where it's gonna go, and it looks, by judge the last 5 minutes, which we haven't actually explained. If you've not seen the film, a lot of people in different coloured tracksuits with blonde wigs come and do sort of kung fu, martial artsy stuff on a load of zombies, and they do a load of backflips. And one of them
to
is
death metal.
Yeah, and one of them's dressed as Jimmy Savile, which is an odd sentence to say. But yeah, Maria, what did you think of the ending?
I loved it. I didn't quite get the Jimmy Savile thing because, again, Jimmy Savile was a bit before my time sort of moving here. So I didn't really know what he looked like. I'd heard of him and I knew he was a pedophile. But yeah, I thought it was hilarious. But then when I got home from the screening and my partner was like, well, tell me about the film, what happens in it. I didn't spoil it for him like unwittingly, like he wanted to know. And I'm just watching his face as I'm explaining the film, and then I get to the end, and I'm like, oh, Jack O'Connell shows up. He's got white hair and a tracksuit and a tiara, and they just start killing everyone. And I'm just looking at his face. He's like, and you like this? I'm like, yeah, it was amazing. But I can also kind of hear myself talking and understand why someone might think, that sounds horrendous. That sounds awful.
I did have a similar experience of explaining it to my flatmate, who also wasn't interested in seeing the film, so I could spoil the ending, and he did not think the ending sounded. It's a very difficult ending to pitch. I would love to have been in the room the first time they had like a meeting. There must have been big studio exec meetings saying, like, look, Alex, Danny, we love the film.
I don't think those meetings ever happened. I didn't know this until a few days ago. But I saw an interview with Danny Boyle, and he was saying that one of the catalysts for the film was the fact that the rights got handed back to Boyle and Garland. So it's essentially theirs. And they were saying that this meant that we don't have to go cap in hand to a bunch of producers and financiers and say, oh, we'd like to do this. And like, well, you know, maybe if you do X, Y, and Z, then we'll give you the money. I think they were basically pretty much given a blank check to do what they wanted, which is really the only explanation for an ending like that.
Do you think the studio now regrets it? They're like, dang it, shouldn't have done that.
There must have been. Like, if you're a Sony executive and you're distributing this film and you watch it and then you watch the end, they must have tried to get in contact with Danny Boyle and be like, what have you done? Why can we end it any other way? Can we change his haircut in post? Can we do anything? But
I didn't get the Jimmy. I think my brain was so overwhelmed with confusion by the left turn that the last scene takes that I didn't. It wasn't until I started reading other people's things on it that I thought that I got the Jimmy Savile connection. I think partly because I thought, well, why would anyone do that? Why would you fight a battle that you don't need to fight? And there are all sorts of implications as well, aren't there? Because obviously, this is the world essentially for the UK ended in 2002, and so Jimmy Savile never would have been caught for anything that he did, whether he became infected and died or whatever. In this version, in this reality, alternate reality. So I guess Jimmy, Jack O'Connell's Jimmy, has those memories of seeing Jim Fix It on TV and, you know, doesn't realise that he was this horrendous predator. And so there are all these kinds of horrendously dark implications. And like I said, I like the film, but I'd say that there's it's morally questionable when there are real world victims still around watching movies and they have families, and to have this, just throw in this kind of allusion to probably one of the most prolific sexual predators this country's ever seen is in questionable taste. But you know, I'm not here to play moral arbiter or anything like that. I'm far too nihilistic and postmodern to start telling people what to think. But it's questionable, I think, in that front. And also, it feels like it's a bit Mad Max. I feel like we're going to get a Mad Max sequel in a way, because you know, like, you've got this gang, and they're all called Jimmy. I've since discovered, if you look on IMDb, they've updated it, and there's names of of his gang, and they have names: Jimmy, Jimmy Fox, Jimmy Shite, Jimmy Jones, and there's a female one called Jimmy Jemima, I can't even say it, and Jimmy Inc. So you've got a whole clan of Jimmys, which sort of feels like, you know, like what they're called in Fury Road, Thingy Boys.
The
and Chrome, you know, it feels like a very Mad Max post-apocalypse idea.
Yeah, well, I think it looks nuts, and I'm so intrigued to see where Nia DaCosta takes it for the sequel. So we've been rattling on for far too long, so we should just about wrap things up. I think just before we end, I think it's worth having a quick 100 words, 200 words each. Where do we think it's going to go in the next film, 28 years later, Bone Temple? I think. I don't like the name instantly. I think that's too much of a mouthful. But Are we just thinking full Mad Max action movie, or do you think it might be more sort of a bit more traditional in a sense?
I think it's going to be thematically a kind of extension of this one, in the sense that it's about reason versus unreason, and you're going to have Spike tempted to join Jimmy's gang of Jimmys, and on the other half you've got Dr. Kelson, because Alex Garland has said that Ray Fiennes, his character, plays a big role in the second film, and the Bone Temple sort of implies that his art installation is probably going to play some sort of role in the plot, if it's referring to the same thing. So I'm guessing it's going to be some sort of tussle, because obviously it seems to me like the whole trilogy is about Spike growing up and him trying to choose his path, what sort of person he wants to become in this kind of topsy-turvy UK. And I guess if he's rejected his father's hunter-gatherer, ultra-masculine community route, and then he's now being offered this cult, potentially, Kung Fu cult, Shaolin, Jimmy Savile Shaolin cult, then that's going to be the next step. What's after that, I've no idea. Who knows?
Who knows? Maria?
Yeah, I think plot-wise, I have no idea. Maybe it will be the Jimmys versus Dr. Kelson, and then Spike's kind of in the middle. I'm worried that Spike's going to get kind of lost in two such kind of outrageous characters, Jack O'Connell and Ray Fiennes. But I think religion is going to be a big part of it, which is what I'm intrigued to see. But plot-wise, I have no idea, especially if they are still kind of planning the third film, and Bone Temple will end on the assumption that there is a third film. So, yeah, intrigued. I think it's going to be dark. And aside from that, who knows? But that's kind of the excitement, isn't it? That you are going into the unknown, and there's something to look forward to because of that.
Intrigued.
Only 6 months to wait as well.
Only 6 months?
Yeah,
it's January.
January? Oh, God. I thought it was the same time next year. Well,
so we should be getting a trailer, I should have thought, in the next few weeks or so.
Yeah. Oh, that's very exciting. Which Kipling poem are they going to use for that one, I wonder?
Exceedingly good cakes.
And on that note, I think that's just about time to end. Thank you very much for listening, watching, however you've been consuming this. Huge thank you to Ryan, Maria, and I was going to say thank you to myself. I don't need to do that. And if you want more,
thank you, James.
Thank you, Maria. Very touched. If you want more from Film Stories, you can head to filmstories.co.uk for all the latest news, reviews, and features all about the world of film and general nerdery. You can also follow us on social media. I think we're at Film Stories on most platforms. If not, you'll find us. You know how social media works. You can also, we've got a YouTube channel where we post more videos like this one, and podcast, Film Stories with Simon Brew, where you can also listen to Ryan's interview with Alex Garland, which went up last week. All that's got left to say is thank you very much again for listening, and see you later. Bye.